You are listening to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida.
Hello and welcome to the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast. My name is Tom Argersinger and I'm your host, and my co-host is Kelly Allen. Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Tom. On the Gospel-Centered Education Podcast, we explore how we as Jesus followers can connect the dots between education, contemporary culture, and biblical theology, and live like Jesus in this broken and challenging world. And today we have repeat guests.
All right, repeat guests.
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We have Dr. Joshua Eller and Miss Sabrina Grubbs. We have all the leaders of CCS here.
I know. That's
today.
So fun.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you both. Dr. Eller, you have been at CCS for how many years now?
Yeah, this is my seventh year.
Seventh year. And you were on the show before, so if you want to know more of a bio, if our listeners want to know more of a bio on you, just go back to that episode. Mm-hmm. We're so happy to have you again here today. Mm-hmm. But what are you doing now? You're CCS secondary principal.
Yes, that's right. So this is my third year as principal, leading the team. So.
Awesome. And you also teach a little bit.
Yep. I have taught 10th grade philosophy for really since I've been here. I took a break last year, but I'm back in the classroom, and it's been really good. So.
Love teaching philosophy. It's so fun.
Well, thank you for being here.
People don't believe that, but it's true.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot of fun. It really is.
We'll see what the students say.
Yeah, I know, right? For sure.
And Mrs. Grubbs, thank you so much for being here again. You've been at CCS for 21 years, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
yes.
And this is your second year being the elementary principal.
19 years in third grade and second year of principalship. So.
Wow.
I have to ask you this. Okay, this is unplanned, right? So all those years, 19 years in a third grade classroom, and then transitioning to administration. What's maybe one of the biggest things that you've learned in that transition?
It's a whole lot bigger role as a principal, and just all the things you need to keep up with and know a little bit about,
It's more complicated than you think, right? Which kind of leads me to maybe an opening statement, and that's to say, we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but we're just kind of scratching the surface. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to unpack what's a vision for gospel-centered schools going forward into the future, a gospel-centered education. And there are multiple aspects to this. It's actually a huge topic, and we're not going to touch on all of them today. So we're going to have certain emphases that we'll kind of touch on as we go through. So I just wanted to kind of set it up that way. So maybe we can begin with begin with you, Sabrina, and just say, maybe you can tell us a little bit about, in general, what do you think are some of the core points that we should keep in mind when we start thinking about a gospel-centered school?
I think the main thing to keep in point is hang on to your moorings. Don't get pulled away. Keep the foundation of truth there, because there's so many other voices and different things going on that if we don't keep the main thing will just kind of unravel.
Yeah. And I love that phrase, hang on to your moorings. I love that. Yeah. It's a reference to the old ships and tying up to the dock and all that kind of thing. Yeah, that's very important. Very, very good. Thank you for that. Anything else? Yeah.
That's great, because the school is kind of like that. You're sailing in a certain way. Which way are you going?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What about you, Joshua? How would you talk about that?
Yeah, for me, I think of the two kind of key scriptural passages are how Solomon ends Ecclesiastes, and what I see is a very rich parallel in how Jesus summarizes the law and the prophets when he's answering the question, who's my neighbor. And that is like that parallel is both, there's an orientation of the person towards God, but there's also an orientation of an embodiment, a living out of that orientation, right? So when I think about, for me, education has never been about the tests. It's always about the person who is becoming that we're sending out. And so I see both of those passages as kind of encapsulating the direction that we want to be moving our students towards.
Yeah, that's so good. That reminds me of something we used to say back in the day. I think we still do say, and that is, there are a lot of questions. I think we've said it before in the podcast. There are a lot of questions that parents can ask about their kids as they grow up. And, one of them typically is, what is he going to do? What is she going to do? Usually that means vocation, career, whatever. How are they going to make money and get out of my basement? Those kind of questions. But I think the better questions are really, who do you want this child to be? And that's kind of what you're getting at.
Exactly.
And in this world, that's not a gimme anymore. That's not a given, because so many of our cultural moorings are not quite the same as they've been. And so therefore, approaching it. I love that. I think both of these approaches are and they're actually interrelated, I think, along the way.
I think you guys have an interesting job, too, because you're not just training the minds, you're cultivating hearts for Christ. And that's different than other schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like when you think about our mission statement, the way we accomplish the mission statement, is renewed and skillful minds. We're developing renewed and skillful minds, strong hands to serve. And then that last part, which is not typical in education, right? Burning hearts for Jesus. Let me ask you that. What does that mean to you? What is that phrase?
It's just a fire in you that you can't put out. And it's just a center of, this is who I want to live for and follow him. And I was thinking, when we were talking about what do parents want, I don't know that Daniel's parents expected him to be in Babylon helping lead the country at the time.
Good point.
So they made a man, or they put enough in him, and with God's help, he became the man that God could use in a foreign country, a heathen country that needed to know about God and his might and his power. And so when he came, he was chosen, if you don't mind me looking at this a minute. Yeah, he was chosen, and his friends were chosen to serve in the king's court because they were well-mannered or well-favored. They had manners and character. They were approachable. They were skillful in wisdom, so they've had some good schooling somewhere. They could apply knowledge through a spiritual filter. I think that's where the wisdom comes in. They were cunning in knowledge, a high level of both book and life knowledge. They understood science and knew how things worked together, so they had a practical knowledge. The ability to stand in a king's palace, they had to be poised, they had to be articulate, respectful, but respected as well. And then they had hearts, and this is probably the most important, that purpose that they would not defile themselves, and that's where we get in the world, but not of it. And then an excellent spirit that I think God has to do that part, but I think there has to be a submission, a surrender on a person's heart, that God can work in that heart. And Daniel, praying 3 times a day, that relationship with the Lord was very important to him. Sure. And that is probably what formed him into what God could use in Babylon.
It's so good that you brought up the surrender piece, because we talk a lot about, just in general, how we try to approach education at CCS as we try to be a really gospel-centered school. And it really does come down a lot to surrender and service. Surrendering to all that you just said, because there's a lot of surrender in that, and trust. And then also realizing that we're here primarily to make a contribution. We're not here primarily to consume. We're here to make a contribution. Joshua, can you reflect on that a little bit?
Yeah, that theme is how I would answer the question. What is burning hearts for Jesus? The way of Jesus was a way not of self-aggrandizement, right, but a laying down of his life, and that is to me that is how we. If those things aren't marking how we're walking, then there's a disconnect somewhere. Because I just see that fundamentally as the marker, that servant leadership. Recognizing someone else as higher than oneself, like those are the themes that Jesus' ministry and his life point to. Yeah,
and that's just, it seems like that becomes more and more radical. It sounds more and more radical as the culture continues to evolve. So maybe Kelly, from a parental perspective, when you hear that. Is that something you want your kids to have? You want them to have that spirit of surrender and service? Yeah,
I mean, of course. I mean, any teenager you would look at and say, yeah, I would want my child to have a heart of surrender and service. And I think just my kids have been through y'all's programs. I think you see that a lot in different ways in the different programs, but you do see that a lot in secondary, where there's a lot of service that goes on there. But as far as day to day, okay, I'm dropping my kids off to school. They need to learn math. They need to learn science. What does that look like day to day as far as the curriculum you're picking, and I guess maybe even how you lead your team? How does that look as you're running a school? How do you have that output? In my child. How does that make sense? How does that work?
Well, that's kind of the nuts and bolts. That's really what we want to do. We look at curriculums, and of course we want them to be biblical based and biblical balanced. And we will, every 3 to 5 years, we'll give each core curriculum another good look, and we'll determine what's out there. And if there's some new things we'll look at, we want them, in elementary, we want them to be very solid as far as foundation and biblically based. We choose mostly Christian curriculums because we feel like there's some trust there. Now, we will try to build that foundation, and Dr. Eller can venture out a little bit more on that. But I think you have to establish the truth in young hearts so that they recognize it, and you start that discernment while they're young. So.
Yeah. And you were talking about this in what you gave us earlier about like choosing strong learning coaches.
Right. That would be with the teachers that we hire, the new hires, and that's probably the most we talk about in the interview. Yes, we're going to talk about their education and their classroom experience, but we try to get to their heart. Is their heart burn for Jesus? Is there an abandonment that they're leaving all to follow Him? Because we know that will transfer into the hearts of the students. So, and then just inspiring current teachers, because you get a little burnout, you get a little tired of the ins and outs. It is a hard
really
job.
Hard job.
It really is. It's you deplete yourself every day if you do it well. You know, so.
Yeah. I remember saying I think I've probably said this, but saying to business friends of mine when they say, what do teachers do all day? It can't be that hard. And I always say, well, try doing 5 or 6 presentations a day to a group of people that largely don't want to hear it. And you'll figure out a little bit about what teaching is kind of like. So, but I want to stay on the teaching theme for just a second, because I know that you've worked really hard, Joshua, in the secondary school and kind of creating a structure that really helps to support the teachers and also just really get some excellent work done. So maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, so at a high level, and this we'll get to the curriculum selection in just a second, but for me, a way of trying to plan out my academic vision is that we try to hire well, and in so doing, we try to emphasize teamwork and the skill set and the expertise of the teachers. So I rely heavily on my team to, when we get to a curriculum selection process. So take, for example, something like a science textbook. We don't only look at Christian publishers. We always look at a Christian publisher. So the state of Florida also helpfully publishes a reviewed list of textbooks and it rates them based on how well it matches to Florida standards. And so we look at top-rated books that Florida has highlighted and Christian publishers. And then we have a committee of science teachers who look at it, who reviews, teacher help, and they're all kind of weighing in, given their experience on the subject. Because ultimately, right, my teachers are they're the ones on the ground who are helping to make this gospel-centered academic vision a real thing. So I need their buy-in to the choices that we make. And so that's my particular style. That's not the only way to do it, but I think we have a very talented team, and so I want them to thrive in the work that they're doing, and to see a way forward that works for them and their teaching style and their expertise.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not just like throwing the curriculum at them. They're involved in picking it out.
Right.
And we're not just picking the cheapest.
Right.
We're trying to find the best for their hearts. So.
Yeah. No, that's so important and so good. I think finding great people today in any business, I think, is very difficult. And I think it's especially true in education with the decline in people going into the profession at the college level. And so I know we've worked really hard to build an increasingly robust infrastructure for training. We've really improved onboarding for new people and as well as professional development. Now we're even talking about pre-onboarding for the people who are not really ready quite because they may be coming from a second career or something like that, which is increasingly common. But at the end of the day, we're looking for people who are strong in Christ, strong in collaborative skills, strong in character, strong in communication, and strong in competence. In other words, they're really, really good at what they do. And then we have to take them from there and kind of move them forward. I think, in a lot of ways, I think that's a key for a gospel-centered school. Because it's hard to find that person with that mix of really great at what they do and also willing to go deep and walk in faith with Jesus. Not an easy thing to do. Again, I was always curious from a parent standpoint, Do you think parents kind of take part of it for granted, one side or the other for granted? Like, oh yeah, they're gonna need to be people of faith, but what I'm really interested in is their ability to teach. Or do you think that most parents kind of see both as essentially important?
I think you have all of that. I think you have some parents, that they want that academic level. Mm-hmm. And you have others that just want that spiritual heart cultivated. And then you have some, and I would say I'm in this category, I want both.
Yeah, right.
You know?
Why should you have to choose?
Right.
Yeah. That's kind of the way we've always approached it.
And I think CCS excels at that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been so pleased.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I'm sure there'll be someone who would disagree somewhere along the way, but I'm glad for that, because we do really work at that. We try to be balanced and try to find people who are in both, kind of excel in both of those areas, and then try to help them grow as they grow. What do you think is, maybe we can touch on this, what do you guys think is maybe one of the greatest challenges that a school that wants to remain gospel-centered, what do you think maybe a specific challenge? You mentioned a little bit at the beginning of the staying moored and all that, but what do you think may be the greatest challenge, or one of the greatest challenges for a gospel-centered school going forward? Either one of you can jump into that one.
In the near term, I tend to think that the continued rise and pervasiveness of social media and kind of the intrusion of technology into family life is a big deal. You know, I'm a big fan of James K. Smith, and one of the things that he says is, you are what you love, right? And the way that our hearts are pulled by media, by popular culture, that's not new, right? MTV was, the social media in some ways a couple decades ago. But the ubiquity of it, the kids' access to it, I think it is more than what, in many ways, it's a new thing, right? So we'll learn to adapt, but there are intrusions of ideas and ways of thinking about the world that parents don't intend to pass on to their kids, but because it's there, even if it's not your technology, it's your friend's technology. Right. It's coming at you in ways that, turning off the TV 20 years ago maybe would have been a much more effective tool than it is now. Yeah, that's good. We've been talking a lot in our training about, the idea that worldview is like an operating system, and it's constantly being updated, albeit in the background. And that's kind of what you're talking about. I mean, we don't even know how it's being updated a lot of the times. Sabrina, how would you answer that?
Yeah, I think even as, I'm not a parent, but even in parenting, I think we don't always know what we don't know when it comes to that. And I remember a professor I had in college that said, what you feed grows, So when I hear parents come in and they say, well, we're just having this trouble this here and here, or we've been to the ballpark till 10 o'clock every night this week, that kind of thing, and I think if they would just kind of back off a little bit and prioritize, and say, I've got to make the main thing the main thing, and still find ways to enjoy the other. I'm not saying those are wrong or bad at all, but just the balance in life. I think we don't know till we get down the road and say, oh, I should have done this more or done this less.
And there's so many voices. I think somebody mentioned that already. There's so many voices, kind of almost yelling at us, whether it's Instagram posts from influencers, even for parents, and all of this and these small groups, and they're basically saying, hey, if you're not doing this, you're doing a terrible job. Remember in the fall, we talked about this. Yeah. And the anxiety that can produce in parents, and all of a sudden you have fear-based parenting, what, the FOMO kind of thing. What if I'm doing something wrong? When in reality, it could very well be, and I think you alluded to this, Joshua, what may be is that we need to teach our kids how to reflect. Mm-hmm. To take the time to get a little silence and solitude. I have to share a quick anecdote. I just heard this anecdote. One of the students in the secondary school, I just heard this, said, they don't love certain aspects of the leadership program, all of the outdoor camping and the weather and all that kind of stuff and the dirt. But they did say what was so interesting. They said, my favorite thing about the leadership program is the silsol, the silence and solitude.
Yes. My 9th grader has enjoyed that.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I didn't know how she was going to do. I forgot what event was in the fall, but there was Silence and Solitude as a part of that event. And I thought, what is she? Yeah, I was very skeptical. I know it's good for her, but, I've never seen her do that.
Yeah. But she actually verbalized that she enjoyed it.
She verbalized that she loved it.
Wow.
She loved it. She thought it was just a beautiful time with the Lord.
Wow.
Yes.
There's something to that, right? I mean, there's so many assumptions we make.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest ones is, my kid would never like that.
I know.
I can't force my kid to do it because they would never like it. And in reality, they may be wrong.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about raising the bar higher for your kid.
Yes.
You know, you don't think that they're going to like something, but, you know, and I think CCS does that and does that very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a tricky balance, right? Because because the one thing we are always hastening to say is we don't believe that everything, because sometimes people draw this conclusion, right? They say, well, CCS just thinks, leadership or whatever at CCS thinks that everything in the world is bad. Everything is wrong. Everything's to be feared. No. First of all, I don't think we've ever said it should be feared. That's not at all true. But we do need to be aware, and back to your point about inputs, we need to be aware of what's being input into that OS of ours. Mm-hmm. And are we balancing it all with scriptural truth? And that's where a lot of the challenge, I think, is. So one of the things we don't talk very much about in the elementary school, at least publicly, is the use of kind of more of a catechism kind of thing in chapel, in elementary chapel, that helps kids to understand some of those basic truths you were talking about. So talk to me a little bit about that. I mean, how do you think that forms kids?
It does form their thinking, you know. It's scriptural. It follows the gospel. It's doctrine, you know, that you just got to have that, or you're going to fly all over the place with your thoughts.
Central orthodox truth.
Right, yeah. And I was thinking of your solitude and
silence and solitude.
And that the verse that if we draw near to God, He will draw near to us. You know, and that's what these kids are just starting to experience, I think, sometimes for the first time.
No, I think
and you're providing an environment where they can do that. Yeah.
I think that's good. You know, in all fairness, there are people that I have friends, for instance, who are Christians, when they think of catechism instruction, they see that as kind of a negative. Because what they'll basically say is you're telling kids the answers to questions they're not asking.
I had a friend who had us over for dinner, and they were thinking about coming to CCS, but the word catechism scared them to death, and they didn't come. I said, it's just truth from God's Word. It's not a certain denomination or anything. It's just truth. So.
I think what I've seen, and maybe I won't say what I've thought, so I'm going to ask what you think. When you see those sixth graders and seventh graders as they, moving into secondary school and towards high school, do you have a thought about that? In other words, do you see that stops kids from asking questions later? I mean, the fact that they already had some answers provided for them through a catechism.
I think what I have heard I've talked to Mr. Collier, our chaplain, a lot about this, and it's something that we've encouraged all of our Bible teachers to do, which is to provide space for unstructured time for kids to ask questions. And what we've seen is that once they really get the sense that you're listening and they can have the freedom to ask whatever they want, the kids are really inquisitive, and they're still being formed by their home church, so you get different questions coming from different perspectives. And I think that, and I know I've heard anecdotally from graduates that those unstructured times for really, and as they get older, they get harder, they get deeper, right? Those are some of the most powerful times. Not that the Bible instruction isn't good, but the kids are revealing their hearts when they ask those questions.
That's right.
And so that's why I think those are so powerful for them
and they're personally processing it.
Right.
And so that's why whenever people say that to me, I always go, well, it's not really a binary question, because catechism, I believe, definitely has a place as far as providing foundational truth. But to your point, there has to be space for the student to go, well, I'm not sure I really get that, or I'm not sure I even really agree with that. I know I had to memorize it, and I think I love that, because I think the freedom to be able to have some doubts and to question some of those things, I think in the end is pretty healthy. It's a little scary. We've talked about that too. It's a little scary. But that's why I think what a good Christian school, a good gospel-centered school can create some space, whether it's through personal reflection or whether it's through dialogue in the classroom. And I'm sure that happens in elementary as well.
It does. We have some Bible lessons that go long because the questions start. And I've told the teachers, please stop and answer the questions if you have to finish the lesson the next day. This is hard work here. So.
I'm just curious. I wonder, like, as far as the questions, I know I taught Bible class for a long time, so I remember a lot of them. But it's like in the elementary school, what are some typical questions that kids kind of struggle with?
Why did God create Satan?
Right.
Why is there bad? That kind of thing.
Why is the old theodicy question, why is there evil? If God's so good, why is there evil? Yeah. It's interesting. People start that question pretty young, and it's a nuanced and deep answer, and that's why it's hard to just flip off a very short answer to that question.
They're already thinking deeply,
that's right.
Trying to piece the pieces together. So
Well, maybe in the secondary, what do you see as maybe one or two of the questions that a lot of kids seem to wonder about? And
so the honest answer about Bible class is I don't know.
Okay.
But I'll tell you that
because you don't teach Bible.
I don't teach Bible. But we end up circling these questions in philosophy class, and one of the things that ends up being a source of, I think, pretty powerful reflection is why kids basically try to follow the rules. And when students really reflect, and when they're honest, most of them say, right now, I'm following the rules so I won't get in trouble, but I recognize I'm not actually doing good, right? I'm just avoiding pain. I'm not pursuing that which is good because it's good, right? And so that's a theme that we come back to a lot about, what is it that's actually drawing you? Just because you look outwardly good, right? Yeah. Doesn't mean that what's happening inside is the same thing. I think that's
really profound for a high school kid to come to that. I remember when I taught philosophy, we would talk about the summum bonum and the great good, which is essentially ultimately God. But the fact that they can articulate that's very encouraging, actually. And one of the things that I think sets CCS apart, I was watching our kids doing the junior research exhibition, and dealing with some very difficult topics, and I was very proud of them. They just did a great job, and the teachers who organized it and managed it did a great job. But the kids to be able to stand up in front of an audience and talk for 20 minutes or whatever it was, 15, 20 minutes, and then answer live questions on the stage as juniors in high school. I mean, that is not easy to do. I remember one student got like a 4-part question, and it was really hard question, and she just handled it so beautifully. She's just like, look, so could you tell me exactly what you meant by that first part? And ask clarifying questions, which also bought her time to think, which was great.
And maintain poise the whole time.
And maintain poise the entire time, and then answered it to the best of her ability. It was a really difficult question. She answered it very well. And I think those aspects of a gospel-centered education are crucial.
Another anecdote from that experience is a student came up to me on the last night, and he said, I'm paraphrasing, but I really didn't like this. And then I found something a topic that I really loved, and I'm actually really glad I did this. Yeah. And to see that transformation, right, which because of the it's a required experience, but it was a kind of trial by fire, and to hear him articulate that he owned it and that this was a transformative experience for him to me, that's exactly what I want for these kids.
Amen. That's so true, because we know, kind of like back to, why do we do this JREX project? Well, it is good for the kids when they go to college. It is good to develop their skillful minds, and they learn how to do research. They learn how to speak well. They do our expected student outcomes and write well and all these things. But ultimately, it's all forming. It's all shaping who they are, back to that point of, and maybe that's a good way to begin to close our conversation today. Because, people always ask me a lot, actually, what's the essence of a gospel-centered school, gospel-centered education? And I think that question of who is this kid going to become, I think is a central issue. I think it's also, I would also say, that the centerpiece, the nucleus, the core of a gospel-centered education is Jesus, the person and work of Jesus Christ, because him being the Logos, and we've talked about this when we were talking, I think, about the about talking about the gospel, a few podcasts ago. He's the Logos, and he's that unifying personality, principle, person of the entire universe. And so how can you have a great education if you don't talk about that? And that's the privilege, So maybe that's a good way for us to end. I started then. We're going to end in a minute. For each of you guys, what for you is the most gratifying part about being a part of a growing gospel-centered school?
And you see individual changes that maybe teachers have worked on over the years, maybe one planted, one watered, and then you see them turn towards God and forsaking all others, and you've seen the ones that struggle, or maybe they just have some anxiety issues, and you see them learn their peace from the Lord, and it's, again, it's the old saying, preparing the child for the path, and that's what we try to do.
Great. How about you, Joshua?
Yeah, it's the same kind of answer. I was just thinking that, there are, the story that I shared about the student after JRX is a kind of success story, but I'm also honored, and I know I'm doing the work of Jesus when I'm with a parent because they're struggling with something that their kid is going through, right? That is every much an opportunity for growth and transformation as a great outcome on a test or a great outcome, in a given school experience. So, but we have to see it that way, right? We have to see with the eyes of Jesus what he's doing. And so both of those really have been transformative for me, to try to walk alongside those who are hurting and to celebrate with those who are rejoicing.
Yeah. It's funny because both of those are so amazing, but it's so, we do talk to parents, and particularly prospective parents sometimes, because they tend to get locked into, back to that question, which is important. As you said, they tend to get locked into one side or the other. Well, I want my kid to be able to go to Harvard. Well, we do too. We would love to have that kid go to Harvard and actually be Jesus there at Harvard, and then you get the people like you said who say, well, I just want my kid to be, a really strong Christian. Yeah. Well, we don't need to choose.
Right. You don't need to choose.
That's right. And so I think that's why I so respect and admire both of you guys. And I really mean that, because the work you're doing is not only great work, it's deeply important work in this generation of young people. And you and the teachers that you represent in the school. So what a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and be with us today.
Thank you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure as always. And so as we always say at the end of these things, we hope you enjoyed this conversation. And just if you forget everything else that we have said, please, please, please remember that Jesus is Lord. Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gospel Centered Education Podcast, brought to you by Community Christian School in Tallahassee, Florida. You can find us online at myccs.org.